This is a story about lost at an old ancient Indian burial grounds. Before we start, please hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. They found their way back at 3:30 in the morning, barefoot in wet grass, shaking so hard the deputy thought they were in shock. None of them could explain why their phones had died, why their clothes smelled like cold smoke and river mud, or why there were tiny white pebbles packed inside their shoes, even though they had never taken the shoes off. The strangest part was the recording on Kenji's phone. It was impossible because his battery had died before midnight, but at 3:17 a.m., his camera had turned on by itself. For 9 seconds, it filmed blackness. Then a man's voice, old and dry, whispered from somewhere close to the microphone, "Count the hills again." That was all. Before that night, Ethan Whitaker, Maddie Collins, Darius Bell, and Kenji Sato were just 4 college students from a small Illinois town called Prairie Bend. They had grown up around cornfields, gas stations, church fish fries, high school football, and the kind of history that got taught in quick chapters before summer break. They knew Native people had lived in Illinois long before towns, highways, and universities, but to them, that knowledge was distant, boxed inside textbooks and museum displays. Maddie was the only one who felt guilty about that. She was 20, white, quiet when she was thinking, loud when she was nervous, and she had taken one college history class that made her realize how little she had ever been taught. Ethan, also white, was 21 and always trying to turn every problem into a plan. Darius was 22, black, broad-shouldered, calm in the way people trust without knowing why, and Kenji, 21, Japanese-American, was the group's unofficial map reader because he was the only one who could admit when he was lost. They drove to Cahokia Mounds on a late summer evening, after a week of classes and part-time jobs had left them restless. Ethan had pulled up the hike on his phone and smiled like he had already solved the day. 3.5 miles, he said, tapping the screen. Easy trail, 52 feet of elevation, 1 hour, maybe 1.5 if we stop for pictures. We'll be back before it even feels dark. Darius looked at the sky through the windshield. The sun was still strong, but low enough to pour gold across the grass. "We have, almost 3 hours. 2.5 easy," Ethan said. "It'll be cooler, less crowded, perfect." Kenji looked into the back seat where there were no backpacks, no flashlights, no jackets, no water except one half-empty bottle rolling by Maddie's foot. This is how people in documentaries make bad decisions. Maddie laughed, but not hard. It's a state historic site, Kenji, not the Amazon. Cahokia looked peaceful when they arrived. The land opened wide around them, broad green fields, low trails, wooden signs, and earth rising in shapes that did not look natural, because they were not. Monk's Mound stood in the distance like a sleeping giant, flat-topped, massive, older than any building any of them had ever touched. For a while, the evening felt beautiful. Cicadas buzzed in the grass. A faint breeze moved across the open ground. Families were already leaving, and the parking lot had that late-day emptiness that makes people speak softer without knowing why. Darius stretched his arms and said, "See, this is nothing. We walk, we take pictures, Ethan pretends he discovered cardio, and we go eat tacos." "Rude," Ethan said. "Accurate, but rude." Maddie looked toward the mounds, and her smile faded a little. "Can you imagine how many people stood here before us?" Kenji lifted his phone. "I can imagine my battery at 41%, so let's not turn this into a spiritual pilgrimage." They started down the trail with the sun still above the horizon, laughing, teasing one another, feeling young and safe, because everything around them looked open and easy. None of them noticed, at first, that the parking lot disappeared behind a thin line of trees, and none of them noticed the first whisper in the grass, because it sounded almost exactly like wind. The trail should have been simple. That was what made the first mistake so easy. They were walking across land that looked like it could never hide anything. Wide fields, marked paths, mounds rising like dark green backs against the orange sky. Ethan kept checking the route on his phone, not because he was worried, but because he liked being the one who knew. After 20 minutes, they passed a wooden sign near a fork in the trail. One path curved toward the main loop, and another smaller path bent around a stand of trees, where the grass grew higher and the light seemed softer. Ethan glanced down at his phone, frowned, then turned left. Maddie paused. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," Ethan said too quickly. "The map is rotated weird, but this connects back." Kenji leaned over his shoulder. "That blue dot is jumping around." "It always does that," Ethan said. Darius looked toward Monk's Mound, now partly shadowed, and then toward the smaller path. "We still good on time?" "Plenty," Ethan said. "We can see everything from here." The smaller path did not feel wrong immediately. It was narrow, but not dangerous. It curved along low ground where the air smelled damp and sweet, like cut grass and old rain. Birds moved in the trees. Somewhere far away, a child laughed, and then the sound cut off so suddenly that all four of them looked back. Maddie rubbed her arms. "Did that sound close to you?" Darius listened. Probably people near the parking lot. But the parking lot was not visible anymore. The trail had bent just enough to hide it, and the mounds around them seemed to rise in every direction. Little hills, soft and rounded, some no taller than a house, some only visible because their shadows looked wrong. Kenji stopped walking. "Guys, my service just dropped." Ethan lifted his phone. "Mine still has a bar." "Mine says, oh," Maddie whispered. That was the first time none of them laughed. They kept walking because turning around felt silly. They were four college students on an easy trail, not children lost in the woods. The sun had not set yet, although it seemed lower than it should have been, flattened against the horizon like a hot red coin. A few minutes later, they reached a space where the grass thinned and the earth rose in three rounded shapes ahead of them. They were not huge like Monk's Mound, but they felt older, more private, like they had not been meant for visitors. There was no sign, no bench, no clear trail marker, only a narrow line of flattened grass threading between them. Maddie stopped so abruptly that Kenji bumped into her. "What?" he asked. She pointed to the ground. At the edge of the path lay a small stone, pale and smooth, placed on top of a broken stick. Beside it was another, then another, making a little row that vanished into the grass. Ethan crouched. "Probably kids." Darius shook his head. "Don't touch it." "I wasn't going to touch it." "You were absolutely going to touch it," Kenji said. The breeze died, and for one long second, the whole field went still. No cicadas, no birds, no traffic. Nothing but their breathing, and then from somewhere behind the three small hills, a low sound rolled through the ground. Boom. They froze. Boom. It was too deep to be footsteps, too steady to be thunder, and too far away to be close, even though Ethan felt it in the soles of his shoes. Maddie whispered, "Is that a drum?" No one answered. Then the sound faded, and the insects returned all at once, louder than before, screaming in the grass as the last edge of sunlight slipped behind the mound ahead of them. Ethan stood up, trying to smile. "Okay, we turn around now." But when they turned, the narrow path they had come from was gone. In its place was tall grass, dark trees, and the first long shadow of evening stretching over the earth like a hand. At first, they argued about the path. Ethan insisted they had come from the right. Darius was sure they had come from behind the middle mound. Maddie kept saying they needed to stay calm, and Kenji walked in a slow circle with his phone lifted above his head, trying to catch one bar of service from the dying sky. The sun did not set normally. It dropped. 1 minute there was red light on the grass, and the next the color drained out of everything, leaving only gray shapes and a bruised strip of purple over the trees. Darius looked at Ethan. "You said we had time." "We did," Ethan said, but his voice cracked on the last word. Kenji's phone flashed 20%. Maddie's was at 14. Darius had 32, and Ethan had 48, which suddenly made him the most important person in the group. They turned on their phone lights, for pale beams shaking across the grass. "Backtrack," Maddie said. "Slow. We look for footprints." They tried. They walked in a tight line, following flattened grass that looked like footprints until it split into 3 different trails. Every direction looked used. Every mound looked familiar. Every shadow looked like the last shadow they had passed. Then Maddie heard the whisper. It came from just behind her left ear, soft enough to be mistaken for breath. "Maddie." She spun so fast her light slashed across Darius's face. "What?" he said. "You said my name." "No, I didn't." She stared at him. "I heard you. I swear I didn't." Kenji's light trembled. "Nobody joke right now." "I mean it." "Nobody." They stood close together, listening. The grass moved without wind. Far away, the drums started again, but lower this time, a heartbeat under the earth. Boom, boom, boom. Another sound rose behind it, voices, too faint to understand, chanting in a rhythm that seemed to come from every direction at once. It would swell for 2 seconds, fade into the insects, then return behind them, closer than before. Ethan swallowed. Maybe there's an event, like a reenactment or something. At night, Darius asked. I don't know. Maddie turned her light toward the nearest hill. Something moved at the top. Not an animal. Not a person. A thin black figure stood there, taller than a man, with shoulders too narrow and arms hanging almost to its knees. The light touched it, and it folded into the darkness like smoke. Maddie made a small sound in her throat. Darius grabbed her wrist. What did you see? I don't know. Kenji whispered. Don't say that. Say anything else. Then the first orb appeared. It rose from the grass ahead of them, no bigger than a baseball, glowing pale blue and drifting without heat, without sound, without any flicker of insect wings. Another appeared near the second mound, then another behind a tree, and soon there were 6 of them, hovering at different heights, as if unseen hands were carrying lanterns through the dark. Ethan raised his phone to record, but his screen went black. No, 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 he muttered, pressing the side button. The battery icon flashed once, showing 37%, then the phone died. Kenji backed away. That's not possible. A pebble hit Ethan's shoulder. He jerked around. Who threw that? Another pebble landed near Darius's shoe. Then 3 more pattered down around them, soft, quick, deliberate. Maddie lifted her arms over her head as tiny stones clicked against the ground. Stop, she said, not loudly, not to her friends, but to the dark. The chanting stopped. For a moment, there was only the cold, and then a man's voice spoke from the slope of the nearest mound. It was old, rough, and very close. Turn back. Darius lifted his light, and on the hill above them stood an old native man with gray hair loose over his shoulders, his face lined deep, his eyes reflecting no light at all. He wore a dark hide shirt, and in one hand he held a staff carved with the shape of a deer mid-leap. Kenji whispered, Do you see him? The old man lifted the staff, and every orb vanished at once. No one moved. The old man stood on the slope with the night gathered around him, and the phone lights could not reach him properly. They showed pieces of him, gray hair, one cheekbone, the curve of the staff, the dark spaces where his eyes should have caught reflection, but they did not show him all at once. Maddie was the first to speak, and her voice was almost childlike. We're lost. We didn't mean to come here. The old man looked at her, then past her, as if someone else stood behind the group. You walk where names are buried. Ethan took 1 step forward, palms raised. Sir, we're sorry. We're just trying to get back to the parking lot. The old man's mouth did not move when the next words came. The voice seemed to rise from the grass itself. White roads, white fences, white hands in the earth. Darius glanced at Ethan, then back at the figure. We don't want trouble. Please, just show us the way out. The old man tilted his head. For the first time, they heard another sound beneath his voice, like hooves striking hollow wood. They call me Leaping Deer, he said. I watched men measure the dead. I watched them laugh at bones. I watched them carry away what had names. Kenji's breathing became fast and thin. He's not real. He's not real. He's not real. The figure turned toward him. Then why are you afraid? Kenji stumbled backward, and that was when the sticks began to snap. One cracked to their left. Another cracked behind them. Then a whole line of them broke in the trees, one after another, circling the group. Darius pulled Maddie close. Ethan's dead phone was still in his hand, useless and black. Run, Ethan whispered. No, Maddie said. Don't run. But a rock struck the ground hard enough to throw dirt against Kenji's jeans, and fear made the decision for them. They ran. They did not run like hikers. They ran like people chased by something their bodies understood before their minds could. Phone lights swung wildly. Grass slapped their knees. The small mounds rose and disappeared on either side of them. Behind them, the drums returned, faster now, not loud, but steady enough to match their hearts. Darius stayed behind Maddie, one hand between her shoulder blades. Kenji ran ahead, sobbing curses under his breath. Ethan kept shouting, this way, even though he did not know. Then Maddie's phone died. Her light blinked once, showed the battery at 9%, and went dark. Keep moving, Darius said. I can't see. I've got you. A handful of pebbles rained down from above, though there were no branches overhead. They struck Darius's arms, Maddie's hair, Kenji's backpack. Ethan looked up and saw dozens of eyes in the dark. Not animal eyes, not human eyes, just wet points of reflected light watching from the slopes, from the grass, from the air between trees. He did not tell the others. He could not make his mouth work. They reached the first of 3 hills and curved around it, believing they were returning to the trail. The ground dipped, then rose. They passed another hill, then another, each one almost the same shape. After 10 minutes, they reached the first hill again. Kenji stopped, so suddenly Ethan slammed into him. "No," Kenji gasped. No. That's the same stick. That's the same white stone." A pale stone rested on a broken stick at the edge of the path. Darius turned in a full circle with his light. "We just walked in a loop," Maddie whispered. "No, we walked around 3 different hills." "Then why are we back here?" The drums stopped. From the top of the nearest mound, Leaping Deer's voice came again, softer this time, almost sad. "Count them again." By then, the temperature had dropped so much that their breath showed in the phone lights. It was still summer, still Illinois, still the same night they had entered with sweat on their backs and jokes in their mouths, but the cold had settled over the low ground like it belonged to another season. Darius checked his phone. 14%. Kenji had 6. Ethan's was dead. Maddie's was dead. The group gathered under a thin tree beside the 3 hills, and nobody wanted to say out loud that they were getting weaker. Thirst made their mouths tacky. The open land had become a maze because the darkness had erased distance. Monk's Mound, which should have been their guide, appeared and disappeared between the other rises, never where it should be. Darius held up his phone. "I'm calling my mom." Ethan nodded. "Tell her to call the police." Darius dialed, and for a moment the screen said no service. Then somehow one bar appeared. The call rang once, twice, 3 times. His mother answered, sleepy and frightened. "Darius? Baby, what's wrong?" The sound of her voice almost broke him. "Mom, listen, we're at Cahokia Mounds, and we got lost. We took a wrong trail, and it's dark, and something is happening out here." "What do you mean something is happening?" "I don't know. We need help. Call somebody, please." "Where are you exactly?" Darius looked around at the black hills, the grass, the blank sky. "I don't know." "Send me your location." "I can't. It won't load." Behind him, Maddie stiffened. A whisper had come through the phone, not from his mother's end, not from the speaker, but from the dark around them, speaking in the same rhythm as her voice. "Where are you exactly?" Darius froze. His mother said, "Darius, answer me." The whisper repeated, closer. "Answer me." Kenji grabbed Darius's arm. "Hang up." "No, I need." A third voice entered the call, old and dry, speaking directly into the receiver. "He cannot take roads into the dead." Darius's mother screamed his name. The call crackled, and then the phone shut off in his hand. The screen was black. Darius stared at it, breathing hard, and then he threw the phone into the grass with a sound that was half anger and half terror. No, man. I'm not doing this." Ethan picked it up, pressed the button, and nothing happened. That left Kenji's phone, 6%, trembling in his hand like a candle. "We have to pick one direction," Ethan said. His confidence had gone thin and brittle. "We keep walking until we hit a road." Maddie looked toward the mounds. "What if he's trying to keep us away from something?" Ethan snapped. "He's throwing rocks at us." "He told us to turn back." "We tried turning back." Darius stepped between them. "Stop. We are not breaking apart. We stay together, we move slow, and if we see anything at all, we do not chase it." They started walking again, following what Kenji swore was east because the faint glow of the city should have been that direction. For a few minutes, it worked. The ground flattened, the chanting faded, and the air warmed enough that Ethan let himself believe the worst was behind them. Then Maddie screamed. She fell forward, clutching her ankle. Kenji dropped beside her with the phone light, and the beam found 2 small punctures above her shoe, already swelling, already darkening. "Snake," Maddie gasped. "Something bit me." Darius carried Maddie at first, but the ground was uneven and slick with dew, and after a while she begged him to let her walk. Her ankle throbbed. Every step made her breath catch, but she kept moving because stopping felt worse. Kenji walked ahead with the last phone, dimming the screen as low as it would go. using the flashlight only in short bursts. In those bursts, they saw things they could not explain. A line of wet footprints crossing dry dirt, each print narrow and bare, each one pointed toward them. A cluster of pale stones arranged in the shape of a deer. A dark figure standing between two trees, then gone when the light returned. Once, Ethan saw what looked like a face pressed against the grass itself, eyes open, mouth full of dirt, watching them from the ground. He blinked, and it was only shadow. The three hills appeared again. Kenji stopped. "We're not moving." Darius looked around. "We are moving." "No," Kenji said, his voice rising. "Our bodies are moving, but we are not getting anywhere." Ethan turned on him. "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything." Look. Kenji pointed to the pale stone on the broken stick. "The same marker." Maddie leaned against Darius, pale and sweating. "Maybe he wants us to count them because there aren't three." Nobody answered. The drums softened and the chanting returned, but now it did not sound distant. It sounded like voices walking beside them in the grass. Men, women, children, old throats, and young throats, all speaking words the students could not understand, except for one phrase that came through in English, again and again, whispered by different mouths. "Not yours." Ethan pressed both hands over his ears. "Stop it." The whisper continued. "Not yours." Kenji's phone flickered. 5%. Then 4. "We need to get to Monk's Mound," Maddie said. Darius stared at her. "Why?" "Because it keeps moving. Or we keep moving around it. But if we climb, maybe we can see the road." Ethan looked toward the black shape in the distance. "You want to go closer to the place where we feel watched? I want to stop walking in circles." It was the first clear idea any of them had heard in hours, so they followed it. They moved toward Monk's Mound with Maddie limping between Darius and Ethan. The closer they got, the colder the air became. The great mound rose out of the dark, no longer a peaceful landmark, but a wall of earth with its stairway cutting upward into blackness. Around it, the shadows seemed to gather like people waiting for service to begin. At the base, Kenji's phone died. No warning. No battery icon. Just black. For a moment, they stood in total darkness. Then Ethan screamed. Something had touched his back, not with a hand, but with 3 burning points that dragged from his shoulder blade to his waist. He dropped to his knees, clawing at his shirt. Darius found him by sound, pulled the fabric up, and even in the dark, they could see the marks because they glowed faintly red, 3 long scratches, parallel and deep enough to be blood. Maddie started crying. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We shouldn't be here." The chanting stopped. Leaping Deer's voice came from the stairway above them. "Then speak it to the ground." Maddie lowered herself with a gasp and placed both palms on the cold earth. Darius went down beside her. Kenji followed, shaking. Ethan stayed on his knees, one arm twisted behind his back, pain making his face wet. Maddie whispered, "We're sorry. We came without respect. We came like it was just a walk. We didn't understand." For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a breeze moved down the side of Monk's Mound, carrying the smell of smoke, leaves, and river water. In that breeze, the old man's voice changed. It was still hard, still full of grief, but it was no longer only angry. "Understanding comes after fear," he said. "Fear comes after trespass." Darius lifted his head. "Please, let us leave." The stairway creaked above them. Not one step. Many. They could not see who was coming down the stairs, but they could hear them. Bare feet, many bare feet, descending the wooden steps of Monk's Mound in slow rhythm. The sound was gentle, almost careful, and somehow more terrifying than running. Ethan reached for Maddie. "Get up." Leaping Deer's voice cut through the dark. "Do not climb." So they backed away instead, one slow step at a time, turning from the mound, keeping their shoulders together. Maddie could barely stand. Ethan's back burned with every breath. Darius guided them by touch, and Kenji, with no phone and no light, held one hand in front of his face like a blind man. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Then the orbs returned. One by one, pale blue lights rose from the grass around the 3 smaller hills. There were more than before, not 6, not 10, but dozens, drifting at the height of human hands. They did not chase the students. They lined a path. Maddie whispered, "He's showing us." Ethan shook his head. "Or baiting us." Darius looked toward the first hill, then the second, then the third. He said, "Count them again." Kenji's voice came from the darkness beside him. "There were 3. "No," Maddie said. "There are 4. At first, none of the others understood. Then the orb shifted, revealing a 4th rise behind the others, smaller than the rest, hidden by the angle of the slope and the darkness. It had been there the whole time. They had circled 3 hills again and again because they had never seen the 4th. The path out was not between the first 3. It curved behind the one they had ignored. A low chant rose around them, but this time it did not sound like a threat. It sounded like memory. They followed the blue lights around the 4th hill. Every few steps, something in the grass watched them. Eyes opened and closed. Shadows leaned. Pebbles rolled uphill beside their shoes. Once a stick snapped so close behind Kenji that he stumbled forward and nearly took Maddie down with him. Darius caught them both. "Keep going," Darius said. "No matter what you hear." Then they heard their own voices. Ethan's voice called from behind them, cheerful and bright. "This way, this way." Maddie's voice laughed from the trees. "It's a state historic site, Kenji, not the Amazon." Darius heard his mother crying somewhere in the dark, begging him to come toward her. Kenji heard his father's voice, even though his father was alive and sleeping 2 counties away, saying, "You disappoint me, son." Kenji stopped. Darius grabbed his shirt. "No." Kenji was crying openly now. "He said my name. That is not your father." "How do you know?" "Because your father wouldn't be standing in a burial ground at 2 in the morning trying to lure you into the weeds." Kenji choked out a laugh, broken and terrified, and they kept moving. The blue lights led them past the 4th hill, down through wet grass, across a shallow ditch, and toward a gap between the trees where the darkness looked thinner. Ethan turned once and saw leaping deer standing at the top of the small hidden mound, staff in hand, with other shapes behind him, hundreds of them, not fully human and not fully smoke. For 1 second, Ethan understood that the old man had not been alone. He had never been alone. A rock struck the ground in front of Ethan, stopping him. From the trees ahead came the sound of traffic. Distant, real traffic. Maddie sobbed. Darius whispered, "Thank God." But leaping deer spoke one last time, so close that all 4 felt his breath cold against their ears. "Leave what you took." Ethan looked at his hands. "We didn't take anything." Maddie looked down at her pocket, confused, then reached inside and pulled out one smooth white stone. Her face crumpled. "I didn't. I swear I didn't pick it up." Kenji checked his pocket. Another stone. Darius found one in his shoe. Ethan found one pressed under his tongue. He spat it into his palm, gagging, and the moment the stone hit the ground, every blue light went out. The darkness after the lights vanished was different. It was not the living darkness of the mounds, heavy with eyes and whispers. It was ordinary darkness, cold, open, and full of distant highway noise. For the first time in hours, the world felt large enough to leave. They stumbled through the gap in the trees and found a paved path. No one cheered. No one had enough strength left. Maddie was limping badly. Ethan's shirt stuck to the scratches on his back. Darius kept looking over his shoulder, and Kenji walked with both hands clenched, as if he could still feel the stone that had appeared in his pocket. The path curved once, twice, then opened onto the parking area. Their car sat alone under a weak yellow light. Darius fell against the hood and started crying without covering his face. Maddie sat on the curb and pressed both hands over her mouth. Kenji tried every phone, one after another, and each screen remained black until he plugged them into the car charger. The dashboard clock read 3:30 a.m. Ethan stared at it. "That's not possible." Maddie looked toward the fields. In the faint distance, Monk's Mound was only a shape against the sky, peaceful again, silent again, as if it had never moved, never watched, never opened the dark around them. A security vehicle rolled in 15 minutes later, then a sheriff's deputy, then an ambulance after Darius's mother called again and screamed until someone listened. The students told parts of the truth, but not all of it. Nobody wanted to say they had heard drums under the ground. Nobody wanted to say an old spirit named Leaping Deer had spoken through a dead phone. Nobody wanted to say the earth had counted them and found them guilty. Maddie's bite was treated, and the doctors said it was lucky, not as bad as it looked, Maybe a dry bite, maybe not much venom. Ethan's scratches were cleaned and bandaged, though the nurse frowned when she saw how straight they were. "What did this?" she asked. Ethan said, "A branch." The nurse looked at him, then at the 3 marks. Must have been a very angry branch. By sunrise, they were back in Prairie Bend, sitting in Darius's mother's kitchen, wrapped in blankets while she made coffee none of them could drink. They promised one another they would never go on an evening hike again without lights, supplies, water, and respect for where they were walking. But promises made after terror are easy. The hard part is living with what terror leaves behind. For weeks, they dreamed of the 3 hills and the 4th one hidden behind them. Maddie woke to the sound of chanting outside her window. Darius found white pebbles in his gym bag, his coat pocket, and once inside a sealed bottle of aspirin. Kenji deleted the 9-second recording from his phone, but it returned every morning at 3:17, always black, always ending with the same whisper. "Count the hills again." Ethan healed slower than the others. The scratches on his back closed, then reopened whenever he lied about that night. If he told people they got lost, they burned. If he said it was probably animals, they bled. The only time they stayed quiet was when he told the truth. Years later, Maddie would write a paper about sacred landscapes and the violence of forgetting. Darius would keep a flashlight in his car forever. Kenji would refuse every hike that started after noon. Ethan would never again touch a stone he found on old ground. And none of them returned to Cahokia Mounds after sunset. Not once. But on the anniversary of that night, at exactly 3:30 in the morning, all 4 of them received the same text message from a number with no name. It contained a photograph. The image showed their old parking spot at Cahokia, empty under moonlight. In the center of the pavement sat 4 smooth white stones in a row, and behind them, barely visible beyond the grass,